Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. So this is our first test run podcast of On the Edge podcast.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Congrats, dude.
And thanks, man. We're going to drink and smoke in my garage, and my wife is going to hate me for this. But since we are drinking and smoking in the garage, that means that the garage door is open, so we'll probably get some weird background noise because we're coming to you from Valencia, which means it's the home of the big pickup truck. And so you'll probably hear some diesel engine in the background at some point. And by the way, we realized right after we built everything, Cole, that everything in this podcast studio is highly flammable, including the curtains, including the sound barrier things on the walls. They're all very flammable. So we got to make sure that when we light up the cigars, we keep them on the table. Chris, could you do me a favor? Could you shut the door and then shut that curtain? Because I just realized we left those open. Anybody who's listening to this first episode will know me well enough to know that I smoke way too many cigars, and my wife's not a huge fan. And they'll probably also know our guest, Cole Strange, loan officer, college graduate, unlike myself, former Army reservist, master's recipients in, what'd you get a master's in?
National Security Studies.
Sounds riveting. So Cole, I met when he decided that he got 2 degrees specifically to go work for the FBI. And then he said, nah, I don't really want to work for the FBI or in the government. That seems real boring. So what led to that decision after 6 years in college that you decided you didn't want to do what you said you wanted to do?
So it was actually from the experience in the Army. And it wasn't that it was boring. It's just like a lot of things, after you've done it a handful of times or after you've done it for a number of years, it loses the sexiness. So, I had to get a top secret clearance in the Army, which sounds, very James Bondish, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do it. So I knew when I enlisted in the military, I was like, well, I'm not going to be an infantryman, right?
Because only idiots like me do that.
Well, quite frankly, I just didn't have the balls to do it, to be frank. That kind of scared me, right? The idea of, particularly when I enlisted, it was in 2010, 2011, and wars were still going on pretty heavy back then. And I'm like, I don't want to be a frontline guy. And I think for you, the war hadn't started yet, right?
No, I enlisted in the middle of my senior year of high school in 1997.
Right.
War was the farthest thing from our mind because, if you think about it, Desert Storm was in 91. Mm-hmm. So I was elementary, junior high. So war wasn't a real conceptual thing to me. And then even that war was 6 days. They never went into Baghdad. So they just blew everything up by tank and planes. So I had not seen in my lifetime, being 18 in 1997, I had not seen war or, Vietnam, or it was just black and white stuff from history class from World War II. So when I signed up, I was like, yeah, of course I want to be an infantryman. The recruiter came and he said, took the ASVAB test, which is the aptitude test for the Army. He's like, hey, you scored really high, in the military. You could join the Army and be a dentist, or you could join the Navy and work on, submarines and nuclear reactors and stuff. And I'm like, no, I think I want to blow stuff up and be an infantryman because I was an idiot. But it was a good time. So, my decision might have been much different if we were 10 years into the, 9/11, post 9/11 wars, and I was seeing people with, feet blown off and dead and coffins coming home. So, I understand how that would be a much different perspective signing up in 2010 than it was in 1997.
Right. And I think particularly after being, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, depending on the war that you're talking about, those are people that were enlisting then. They had seen the consequences, right? There were some people that after 9/11, they signed up right away. And it, like you're saying, it had been a long time since we had actually seen anything. For me, when I was coming out of college and was thinking about enlisting, I had seen guys come back and I had seen, the consequences. Whereas for some of the other people that were enlisting in 2001, 2002, 2003, they hadn't seen what happens. Whereas I had. So, and because of that, I knew that I didn't necessarily want to be an infantryman. In fact, I knew I didn't want to be an infantryman. But my dad was in the Army. My dad was in during Korea. Was raised with a family that had a high level of respect for the military. So I wanted to do my part. So yeah, I graduated college and wanted to do my part. Didn't want to just go and work a corporate job or whatever. So enlisted in the military. Also took the ASVAB and scored really high. And they said the same thing, like, you can do whatever job you want. So I said, well, let me look at them. And I think it's probably just because of movies or whatever that I had seen is like, oh, what job requires a top secret clearance? And they're like, oh, well, that's mostly the intel jobs. So went over the different intel jobs, and you can specialize in a field of intelligence, like signals intelligence or open source intelligence or imagery intelligence. For me, I like the idea of what was called an all-source intelligence analyst. So we would take a look at all the different types of intelligence and then paint a story for the commander, whoever it was that you were reporting to. So I did that, got the top secret clearance, came out. And at that time, I was still enjoying it, still thought that it was sexy. And so I went to, I thought I was actually going to go through OCS. And then
which is Officer Candidate School.
Right. So
because you already had a 4-year degree?
Yeah, I had a 4-year degree, but I wanted to, at that point, I was still enjoying the military more than what I was when I later decided not to get in and do the FBI stuff. But,
and real quick, you made the decision when you got out of college to be a reservist, right?
Right.
So the embarrassing thing is I was in the Army. I still don't understand the difference between active duty versus reservist versus National Guard. So what the fuck is a reservist?
A reservist is somebody who's not sitting on a military post. So right now there's hundreds of thousands of soldiers across the U.S. on Fort Benning, Georgia, right? All the different active duty posts, Fort Drum in New York. We got military posts down in San Diego. Those are guys who are stationed on active duty, and regardless of whether or not they're deploying, they're waking up every morning and they're doing the military stuff, right? They're cleaning their gear, whatever it was that you were doing, right?
Yeah.
Like not a whole lot, right?
I spent a lot of time, and only ex-military people will understand this. I spent a lot of time dry sweeping the motor pool. And for those people that are listening that aren't in the military, all that means is you basically take the equivalent of kitty litter, which is like this dry powder, and you rub it in with your foot on all the oil stains around the parking lot where they park the tanks and the Humvees and the tractor trailers and everything. And then you sweep this dry sweep all day long. And I imagine it has something to do with discipline and cleanliness and whatnot. But all I remember is 3 years at Fort Riley, Kansas, getting this fucking kitty litter dry sweep and spending hours and hours and hours just rubbing it in with our boots into all the oil spills and then sweeping it up. That was literally half of my military experience. Being in from 97 to 2000, there was no wars. There was no 9/11, Bosnia. I was so bored at Fort Riley, Kansas. I volunteered to go to Bosnia to clear mines like that were still live and exploding. And there was so many volunteers to go to Bosnia because people were so bored in Kansas. I didn't get a slot to go to Bosnia to dig up landmines. So that will give you guys a little, for those of you that haven't lived in the dead center of Kansas, that'll give you a little hint at how boring it is out there. But anyway, so back to your reservist. So,
I mean, so the all the stuff that you're describing right now are stories that I had heard in one way or another, and that did not sound appealing to me. And not that there's anything wrong with what you did. There sure as hell isn't. But you know, the way I looked at it is, cool, I've got the college degree. I want to do something productive with my life. I didn't have like a discipline problem or anything like that. So I'm like, cool, I'm going to enlist in the reserve. And if my country needs me, then they can call me. But the idea of sitting on a military post on active duty did not sound particularly appealing. So I said, cool, I'm going to keep trained up. I'm going to continue to do the PT test and stay in good shape. And once a month, which is, you know, to answer your question, what does a reservist do? A reservist shows up once a month for a weekend, and they do what's called drill, which is they go, and a lot of it is similar stuff, to be frank, except for just a weekend instead of your, you know, for 3 years. But a lot of it is just doing all the paperwork stuff, right? You have to maintain a level of readiness so that if the country calls, you're in a deployable position. That's what they were always focused on is, you know, the NCOs were always focused on making sure that we were deployable, meaning we were healthy enough where if something did happen, we could go. But a lot of it was administrative stuff too, right? Making sure that we had the physicals. So
this is kind of like the AAA baseball of the Army, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're not quite active duty, but if the shit really hits the fan, they're like, well, at least this guy knows how to load and fire his gun because he's been practicing once a month, and they're staying in physical shape, and we test them every month, and it's like you're like the AAA of baseball, who you're ready to be called up to the big leagues at any moment.
That's a very respectful way of putting it. Out of all the ways that I've heard former active duty guys describe a reservist, that was a very respectful way of describing it. So I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll take AAA to the big leagues any day.
It's all about respect on the Edge podcast.
Yeah, dude. I mean, for me, it's like, hey, everybody, can raise their hand, and regardless of to what extent it was, like if you raise your hand and you sign on the line that is dotted, you did it. It's just everybody's got a different, way that they served. And what's been really cool is the guys that have done the most stuff are the ones that say that, right? It's whenever I get shit about being a reservist, most of the time it's from people that really didn't do anything, and they're trying to like make themselves feel good about the service that they had. But deep down, like they're, ashamed or feel
insecure.
Yeah, insecure about what their service was. Like the guys who had multiple combat deployments, gone through the shit, are the ones that are like, no, man, like you did your part. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, like that's a very consistent thing.
And, what's interesting to me is that because of the operational tempo of the military the last 20 years and being deployed to Iraq and not Iran, but almost Iran and Afghanistan and everywhere else, I think we have a generation of soldiers where a higher percentage of them saw really violent action and firefights and stuff. But I remember reading a stat that even over the last 20 years, the guys that all the movies are made out of, or the Jocko Willinks of the world who are, pulling triggers and taking incoming rounds, it's something like 5 to 8% of the military actually ever sees combat. So it's kind of interesting to me that I think most people that have ever served in the military have more of your experience and my experience, where it's like, I didn't go to war. I didn't get shot at. I didn't have to shoot at anybody in anger. I never was at, well, other than a couple stupid people almost blowing us up at the range one day. I was never at risk of dying for my country. But to your point, the guys that have seen the most craziness, they're like, no, at any time it could have been you instead of me.
Right.
And that's always really interested me, that like 90% of even the Army, maybe a little bit less on the Marines, we're never shot at.
Right.
So I think most people's military experience is a lot closer to yours and mine.
Right.
And then people start getting that Al Bundy syndrome, where the older they get, the greater they were and the more risk they actually took, where it's like, no, we were never shot at.
Right.
Lockdown, nothing can be opened up. I'm very sympathetic to the fact that ICU beds are getting stacked and people are dying of COVID. I'm not unsympathetic to that. I am also sympathetic to the business owners who are just getting crushed, and the politicians that are the most hypocritical ever. And so let's start there. What do you think of all the hypocrisy that's currently going on with our local officials? Whether it's the lady on the board of health supervisors that voted to close down all the restaurants and then ran to her favorite restaurant to eat there, or whether it's Governor Newsom, who, by the way, I was willing to give Newsom a pass, like a total pass for the last 8 months, because who the fuck knows what's going on, right? Like nobody has all the data points on COVID. Nobody knows exactly what's going on. Nobody's had to deal with this before. So I was really willing to give him a pass on anything that he's done poorly or done well or whatnot. But then when he's the guy who should have the most data points, and he's like, fuck it, I'm going to go to the French Laundry, which is a very fancy restaurant here in LA, or here in California, up in the Bay Area, and I'm going to have dinner with 20 other people indoors from a bunch of different households, like literally flying in the face of every rule and edict he's passed. I'm like, well, I kind of expect you to be a hypocrite because you're a politician, but now I know that the person who's the most informed is not even really scared of the disease or transmission or whatnot. So to me, it was more of a hypocrisy thing than any one person understanding the science or having all the right answers. But yeah, I don't know. I just want to get somebody else's perspective, because I live in my own little grumpy bubble up here in Valencia, where I'm starting to feel like an old man who's telling people to get off my grass. But are you with me? Are you against me? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think I'm probably more with you than against you. I actually think that he I think that it's as serious as what people are saying that it is. And when I say people, I just mean if you talk to the average person on the street and you ask them, hey, is COVID serious? They say, yeah, it's serious. Like, it's clearly killing people.
Absolutely.
What I think frustrates me the most, and what I think his, particularly Governor Newsom, who, you know, just going back, when COVID first hit, California was like doing the best, right? And I don't know what happened, but that was something like at one point I was saying, hey, Governor Newsom, like he's doing a great job.
Doing good things, yeah.
Which is kind of weird in retrospect to think about, like what particularly was he doing different than anybody else? I think he was just fortunate to have a state that, for one reason or another, I've heard some theories that COVID came through California sooner, but that doesn't really add up because now we're having more cases than anybody else. So I don't know all that's going on, but what is frustrating, and I think that he thinks it's serious. I don't think it's him with a power grab completely, although I'm sure he's enjoying the power grab and all of that. I think he just thinks that he's clean and we're dirty peons. You know what I mean? Like, I think that the elite of society who are still going out and getting together, like you see it on Instagram and all of the celebrities who, you know, are, mask up and do whatever it may be. They're still going out and partying like,
because they can all afford to go to Tulum.
They can afford to go to Tulum or wherever else. Tulum's super cheap to go to. I don't know if you're saying that because I went to Tulum a couple of months ago or what.
No. I was totally saying that because apparently every Instagram influencer in Austin and Southern California is literally in Tulum right now.
Right.
It's like party/COVID central.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cheap to go to right now. Like, I got a flight and it was round trip, like $150 or something like that. Like, it was super cheap.
Neck podcast in Tulum.
Yeah. So, and the hotels were 50% off. So I think a lot of people are going there because of that. But besides the fact, I think that the celebrities are saying, oh, well, we're getting tests before we're getting together. I think that the governor, celebrities, anybody who's getting together right now, they think the average person is dirty and don't have the resources that they have. So they can continue to go about their lives because wherever they go, they'll get tested, as if that means that there's no chance that they're carrying the virus, and people like us are dirty and so they can't be trusted. And so we need to like stay indoors and not see our family while they spend time with, you know, their friends. You know,
that's really interesting because I have been thinking a little bit about that, and you kind of solidified it in my mind just by your comments there, is that, you know, and I have not confirmed this, but what I've been reading is that Newsom's kids are still going to private school and whatnot. So there is a little bit of that, like, oh, well, if you can afford to go to private school and you're elite, then we're safe. Like the rich kids are safe, but the unwashed masses, like we can't let the unwashed masses go to private school or go to public school. And I think you're right. I think that's a little bit of it. It's a little bit of an ego elitism thing where it's like, yeah, this is a dirty disease that doesn't affect us because we're not going to cough on each other, or we're not going to make out with strangers.
We're smart enough to do these things that we'll do the distancing thing or look away when we cough or wear our mask or whatever it may be. But all the other dirty, stupid peons, they're incapable of doing that. So they need to stay indoors. Like, that's what I think is going on more than anything else. I think everybody deep down knows that it's serious and doesn't know to what extent that it's serious. Like, for me, I think that it's overblown to some extent just because I've known a lot of people that have got it and they've been okay. Although there's a guy that I grew up with who died who was in his 30s, right? So I know it's serious. But I think that deep down, everybody's just trying to do the damn best that they can.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll have to find this Facebook thread that there's a few of us having a healthy little debate, because I think it really summed up it really summed up what I would say more of the conservative mindset. And I'm not necessarily saying conservative like you voted for Trump or you're into Reagan economics. I'm talking about more of a conservative traditional mindset versus more of the liberal progressive mindset. And there was an interesting exchange on Facebook with some friends of mine and a lot of people from both sides of the aisle who I respect a lot. And effectively, the more conservative or right-leaning or Trump voters who were commenting on the thread were saying things such as, you know, personal freedom, People have a right to work and things of that nature. And then somebody who, again, I have a ton of respect for. He's a self-made, wealthier guy. He's a realtor who does a lot of business, very socially responsible, great family, first generation here in the country. He said something to the effect, actually, not to the effect, I'll just read it here directly. Where did it go? He was basically talking about the fact that there's really no personal responsibility. And what I mean by that is in the exchange between the people who are having actually a very pleasant political conversation, he said, and I'll just read it here directly because I think it's worth noting. He said, "Hey, Scott and some other people are coming. I understand how you feel, and your rant is a great reflection of how you feel. So what is the solution? Complaints are cheap. How do you suggest we solve for any facet of this pandemic? And while you're thinking about this, remember that Americans are like small children. If you give them an inch, they will take a foot. Of course, we would all like parks to be open, but if people will use them to play pickup basketball or get 30 friends together for a group hike and a barbecue, we can't have parks open. That's lame. Everybody or people abuse the system. Like children that can't have nice things because they don't respect them. If everyone was serious about mass social distancing and not mixing with people outside their homes for a few weeks, we could really accomplish something here. But it needs to be almost everybody. 50% of the people doing the right thing isn't going to solve the problem." And I think his comment, which I told him, again, respectfully, I think his comment really got to the root of more of the liberal belief versus more of the conservative belief. And conservative, I would almost call these days like a classical liberal, because I don't know there's a ton of conservatives that are going crazy on the religious train, or they're still fighting against gay marriage, or whatever the social issue of the day is. Yep. But there's this belief amongst a lot of conservatives that are like, hey, it's more about personal responsibility, taking care of myself, taking care of my family, where this gentleman who's a very intelligent, self-made, self-employed businessman is like, no, you can't give Americans anything. They act like children. He's basically towing the modern progressive line of like, well, government has to have a plan for everything because you and I and every other American, we're too stupid to do it for ourselves. And that to me was just so telling of like, oh yeah, this is what 50% of the country thinks. 50% of the country thinks that we have no personal responsibility, discipline, or agency. And I thought that was really sad. I wasn't even scared or mad. It was just really sad. And I don't know. I don't even have a question there. I guess I'm just ranting.
I guess I could give my thoughts on it. I think that he's right that Americans, and it's built into our culture, that we're going to do what we want to do. And I think what your point is that you're making is that the government coming in and saying you can't do this or you can't do that is going to stop anybody from doing it, right? Like they're unlike China, who can shut down their country and say, hey, we're going to kill you if you don't do this, which is just not going to happen. And by the way, that's a trade-off that I'm willing to take. Like I would much rather live in a country where we do have those freedoms and we do have that individual liberty. And the government can't come in and say, we're going to kill you if you don't stay in your house. I'm okay with that trade-off versus, the alternative of, hey, some people aren't going to follow the rules. And as a result, COVID's going to, get out more than what it did in China, right? Like I'm personally okay with that trade-off with liberty of being able to leave my home and make the decision for myself than live in a country where, they restricted COVID significantly better than what the United States did. At least we think they did.
Right. We hope they did.
Yeah, right. But with all of the other impingements on freedom that come along with that protection. I think viewing some U.S. citizens as children is accurate. I don't think that represents everybody, because I bet if you got that guy, whoever it was that posted that, or woman, whoever posted that, I bet if you got them in a room like this where it wasn't being recorded and you said, hey, have you gone out and spent time with any family members or friends? They would say yes. Like, I don't know anybody who has not gone out and spent times with family members and friends. And we know that that's where the majority of spread comes from. Like, I've flown more this year than I have in any other year and have not gotten COVID. And I know that that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but spread happens with people that you're close to. Like if I'm going to get COVID, it's going to be because I spent a lot of time with you, or I spent a lot of time with my girlfriend or at my girlfriend's parents' house. It's not going to be because I went out and got something to eat at a restaurant, particularly if we're taking the precautions.
Right.
Like some people are so blown away that I haven't gotten it. I'm like, I take the precautions. Like I wear my mask, I keep a distance, I do the hand sanitizer thing. Like I take all of the precautions that I think somebody who is responsible should be able to do right now.
Yeah.
But I personally think that the whoever it was that posted that is a hypocrite, because I guarantee if you sat them in a room where it was just you and them, and you asked them if they've gone and seen family members or friends in the past 9 months, they're going to say yes. And by doing that, it makes you a hypocrite. That's why somebody like Governor Newsom saying, you know, hey, you can't leave your house. Like he's leaving his house. He's going and doing those things. Like he got caught. Nancy Pelosi got caught. All of those people got caught because they're doing what everybody is doing.
Right.
And that's where the, you know, frustration and the hypocrisy comes into play. And then when somebody who doesn't like Newsom or Pelosi sees that, that's going to make them probably want to be more rebellious and go out even more. Just is kind of a middle finger to the, you know, the man and the authorities. So.
Yeah, you know, what's interesting is going all the way back. I should probably take notes during these podcasts, going all the way back to what you said about the trade-offs of the U.S. and China. And this is going to be an anecdotal stretch, and somebody will fact check this and they'll decide that it's totally inaccurate. But let's say the trade-off is we live in the type of country where when it's all said and done, 500,000 people are going to die of COVID. And we could argue all day long that 100,000 of those it was really pneumonia, and 200,000 of those were comorbidities that were probably going to die this year anyway because they were in nursing homes. And I don't want to be unsympathetic to somebody who's lost their grandmother to COVID because that's a tragedy.
By the way, before you move on, I just want to make note of what you're talking about. So finish your thought, but I want to come back to what it is that you're saying here in a second. Yeah.
So let's say we live in the type of country where 500,000 people are going to die of COVID because we aren't the type of totalitarian country like China. But the trade-off is, unlike China, we don't put our Muslims in concentration camps.
Correct.
Because China is 100% confirmed, cannot deny it, relocating, as they like to say, relocating Muslims into work camps, which is the same thing that we said about the Japanese, the same thing that the Armenians, were told by the Turks, the same thing that the Jews were told by the Germans. So I don't care how you phrase it. The Chinese people put Muslim people in internment camps.
Yes.
And so if you say like, well, China did this so much better because they have the authoritative rule or the authoritarian rule to lock down the country, and they only lost 100 or 150,000 people, and America ends up losing 500,000 people, there is some trade-off where it's like, well, we live in the type of country where we're going to lose those people because of our individual freedoms because we don't put people in internment camps anymore, even though we did during World War II with the Japanese. Yeah. And I'm okay with having that discussion. But these days, you can't have this discussion without people being like, oh, so you want to kill my grandma? It's like, no, I just want to have an intellectual discussion of the trade-offs.
Right.
So that was my thought, but I'm guessing that you had a thought that you want to circle back around to.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like that's a trade-off that I'm willing to take because you can say this is a casualty of having a free society, right? Like you have a free society, you don't rule with an iron fist. So there's pros and cons. And this is a negative that I'm willing to take, I guess is just where I would put it. Yeah, all of the other atrocities that come when you have a country like China, where when you live in a country like China, like I'm going to take the negatives that come with the U.S. over the negatives that come with living in a country like China, for sure. Yeah. All that being said, COVID's serious. People are dying. But I personally think that it was hyped up significantly because of the elections. I think that the media was significantly hyping up to what extent coronavirus was and is compared to other diseases. And this is why I wanted to come back to what you were saying is this is a stat that I've brought up to a few people, and it's just math. And so what I would pose to somebody who says, oh, look at how many deaths there have been in the United States because of coronavirus. And we all know that if you die and you have COVID in your system, it's a COVID death, right? And it could be for a number of reasons, but if you die and coronavirus is in your system, it's a COVID death. Do we agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So I was looking back because I was in Washington, D.C. during the swine flu. And I remember, like, at the very beginning, there were a lot of hysterics, like similar to what it was when COVID first started, right? Like you had this kind of unease around people when we weren't really sure how serious it was. I felt the exact same thing at the beginning of COVID as I did with swine flu back in 2009. And then I think that we had President Obama and we had President Trump and we had an election year and we didn't have an election year in another one. And we had a media who hates Trump, who spent all of their time trying to figure out a way to discredit him and make him look bad. It's like, okay, if Trump's responsible for coronavirus, like so is Governor Newsom in California. Because like, to what extent does the president really have power over, you know, the responses, right? Anyways, I'm getting off subject of the point that I want to make. So here's the point that I want to make. Every year in the United States, approximately 1% of the population dies. So I don't know exactly what the number is. I think it's around 300 million people in the United States, right? So 1% of 300 million is 3 million people. So let's just say no matter what, 3 million people were going to die in the United States this year. Track it so far. Any flaws?
I barely graduated high school, but the math, 1% of 300 million makes sense to me.
All right.
I think we're actually at like 380 million these days. But whatever.
328.2.
Okay.
Oh, cool. 328 million.
There you go.
There's
cool.
Chris. There's Chris. 328 million people in the United States. So 3.2 million people.
0.2.
All right.
3.2 million people were going to die this year of something.
Cool. So following that math, do you happen to know how many cases of swine flu there were in the United States between April of 2009 and April in 2010? CDC numbers, estimate for number of cases of swine flu.
So if I was just Scott Grove's ignorant little fuck sitting in Southern California, I would probably say 10,000 or 50,000. It just so happens that my best friend, who does mergers and acquisitions for Citibank, was living in Hong Kong and then Singapore when the swine flu was going on. And they were in full hysteria, lockdown, because like most weird diseases, it came from the wet markets in China. Mm-hmm. And by the way, that's not a anti-Chinese, racist Chinese thing. That's just a fact that if you've ever gone to a wet market in Hong Kong, which I had, you can look around there and be like, holy shit, how does every disease in the country not come from this place? Or in the world not come from this place? Anyway, I digress. So because I have that knowledge of how freaked out he was and the Chinese and the Singaporeans were, I'm going to guess there was 100,000 swine flu cases.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S.
You think there were 100,000?
Maybe 100,000 reported cases? I have no clue.
60 million.
There's 60 million people had swine flu in the U.S.
60.8.
60.8 million estimated cases of the swine flu between 2009 and 2010.
Shut the fuck up.
Correct. No, I won't shut the fuck up because this is the truth. So that's roughly 1/5 of the United States population, correct?
Had swine flu.
Had the swine flu by CDC estimates.
I honestly would have never. You could have given me 30 guesses. I would have never even got half that high.
I know.
Because I felt like I was super well aware of the disease due to my buddy living in, again, Hong Kong and Singapore at the time. And I knew it was a bigger deal than, maybe the media was reporting on, or, we just don't take things seriously in America. I think people would have to be literally dropping dead at the Walmart of Ebola before people would take it seriously. It would have to be like trending on Twitter. And I would have never guessed. So of those 60 million, how many people died?
Well, I think it was reported it was like a few thousand, right? But here's where like my conspiracy theory comes into play and the math's about to get a little bit more difficult here now.
Okay, remember, I barely got out of like geometry in 10th grade.
But if 20% of the U.S. if 20% of the U.S. population, by CDC estimates, had coronavirus,
and had swine flu.
Had swine flu.
Okay.
And roughly 1% of the U.S. population dies every year. And if we just so happen to be doing the level of testing on swine flu that we are in coronavirus, we take 20% of 3 million. And what's that?
600,000.
Right. You'd have six. And that's just because if we test somebody and they have coronavirus, it's a coronavirus death. But if they had been doing the level of testing on swine flu that they're doing on coronavirus.
Yeah, because all the people that died of a respiratory disease, heart attack. You know, I read something the other day in the UK that they were classifying 65-year-old man, 60-year-old man, 70-year-old man, somewhere in there. I'm going to get some of the facts wrong. Again, maybe Chris can fact check this. There was a guy in the UK who fell off a ladder. He fell off a ladder.
Yeah.
And they're counting it as a COVID death.
Right.
Because they said, well, he had COVID, so therefore he may have had shortness of breath, and it was the shortness of breath that caused him to fall off the ladder, and the head trauma that he suffered from falling off the ladder caused him to die, so therefore, ipso facto, it was a COVID death. And I was like, well, that might be a bridge too far if we're trying to accurately report deaths from the disease.
Correct. So what my point is on all of this is that if we had been giving tests the same way that we are, and I would venture to think that pretty much anybody that's dying right now, they're doing a test to see if COVID's being found in their system.
I don't know if you even know this, but my sister is 8 months pregnant. She had to go to the hospital yesterday because she had a little scare. She was having I think she was actually having some dietary issues, and they were worried that it was like pre-labor, premature labor. Yeah. So she went and she tested positive for COVID. Probably because she's been going in and out of hospitals once a month for the last 5 months, or a couple times a month. And so she had COVID. She's had no symptoms. She's not coughing. She's not, is asymptomatic when you show symptoms. Yeah. So she's not
asymptomatic when you don't have symptoms.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So she's not symptomatic. She's not showing any symptoms. She's not having any pain from it, but God forbid. And I'm glad that she's healthy and happy and the baby's healthy and happy. Had she had pregnancy complications, because people still die in America from giving birth, had she had pregnancy complications for something completely outside of a respiratory problem, she bled out, they would have 100%. They would have counted that as a COVID death because it would have been comorbidities, complications from COVID. We don't have the full stats on COVID on how it affects pregnant women. So maybe that caused the preeclampsia and all this other crazy stuff. But yeah, I would have never guessed that 60 million.
Yeah, man. So that's my conspiracy, but it's just math. If 1% of the population, that's 3 million every single year is going to die, no matter what, pandemic, no pandemic, whatever.
Can you shut that door, Chris? The door there keeps slamming open and shut.
And 60 million of the U.S. population which is 1/5.
Yeah.
So if 1/5 of 3 million, which is, like you correctly did the math, that's 600,000. We would have reported 600,000 swine flu deaths between 2009 and 2010 if we'd been doing the exact same thing with swine flu is what we're doing with coronavirus.
And by the way, again, if this podcast ever becomes a big deal and somebody goes back and watches our first episode, somewhere your math's wrong, my math is wrong. We're getting some of the stats wrong.
No, my math's not wrong.
Let's just say somebody smarter than us figures out that it's like, they were way off. It was actually 1/10 of what Cole was saying. That's still 60,000 deaths, and swine flu was not a blip on the radar in 2009. There was sure no fucking daily report from the LA Times, the New York Times, the New York Post, CNN, Death Watch, Infection Watch. The thing that bothered me about it being just math.
I just feel like you're not reacting the way that I was expecting you to.
No, I'm really angry about it, but I'm trying to stay calm.
I'm so certain that this was blown up because it was an election year, and I'm not saying that coronavirus is not more serious than what the swine flu was. I don't know. Maybe it's not, but it's just by doing the math on it and the media coverage, like. Man, do you remember like the airplanes coming in and the gurneys that they were bringing people in? Like it looked like something out of a sci-fi film, man. Like I just feel like that was so manufactured.
Yeah.
That if Obama's administration, not to make it about Obama or Trump, but Media loved Obama.
If a beloved president,
Yeah.
I don't care if it was Reagan or Obama or whoever, if a beloved president was in office
right now, we would not
be locked down.
Yes.
And let's be honest, Trump makes it very easy to hate him. He says all the wrong things. His fucking Twitter feed is just intentionally inflammatory. And, that got 78 million people to vote for him. Turns out he needed 80 million people, but whatever. I understand why it's easy to hate him, and I understand why it's easy for the media to hate him, and everybody knows he says the wrong things at the wrong time for everything other than getting, elected or firing up his base. So I get why everybody hates him. But I also get that, like, hey, at this point, Governor Newsom has all the same data points that the president of the United States does. Like, they're getting the same CDC briefings. Anybody who lives in California that's still proud to live in California, they love to point to the fact that this is still the 7th largest economy in the world, California by itself. It's like, all right, well, the leader of the free world is our president. The leader of, like, the second most important free world is maybe Merkel in Germany. But, like, if we were just talking about leaders of the free world, you would think that the governor of California has to be pretty high fucking up there, since we're the 7th largest economy in the world. To me, at this point, Newsom has all the same data, and we're still screwing it up in California, Yeah. For me, the math that really bugged me, that made me feel conspiracy theory-ish, is how they've been moving the goalposts, right? So if since March they were always tracking ICU bed usage, I'd be like, oh, that's a really good barometer. But remember, in March, they were only tracking amount of PPE, because that was the scariest stat, right?
How many ventilators do you think we have that are
we've
never
got
going to be
400
used?
million ventilators in this fucking country now. Like, Elon Musk shut down the Tesla factory and made 40,000 ventilators in like 3 days or something like that. So, the first thing it was PPE. We're all out of PPE. And then, like, when that wasn't a scary enough stat, they moved to the stat of, like, oh, the death rate, because we weren't testing people. We were only testing people that were dying. So the death rate was really high, but really good scientists were doing sciencey shit and saying, like, well, no, if we extrapolate out the cases we know plus the cases we don't know. So then that stat didn't get scary enough. So then when we started finally 2 or 3 months later doing a reasonable amount of testing, then it was, oh, well, we got to report on number of cases, because that's the scariest stat. And so then, the scary stat has changed every month. Yeah. And now we're at what I believe to be a very scary stat, which is ICU bed usage. But as Chris pointed out, they started about a month ago saying that, oh my God, ICU bed usage is down to 10% or 12% of total capacity. Well, Chris just looked it up, and Chris and I are both basically high school dropouts. And he's like, dude, the national average for ICU bed usage is always at 85%. Because ICU beds are fucking expensive. They're the most expensive position in a hospital, other than maybe like an operating table or a neurosurgeon. So hospitals just don't have, aircraft bays full of ICU beds waiting around. They have figured out the math over the last, 40 years that if we need 12 ICU beds at Children's Hospital, we're going to always be at about 10 ICU beds of capacity. And I don't know what their real ICU bed capacity is, but it's not like we were sitting around at zero capacity, zero usage, and now we've swelled up to 90% usage. No, we've always been at about 85% usage of ICU beds, and now we've swelled up to 90, and that could get really scary. But again, it's just another fake, scary stat that the media is using because they have to sell newspapers, because they know they're losing to YouTube, and they're losing to TikTok, and they're losing to Joe Rogan and Dave Rubin and all these blogs. And so the media just has to be as scary as possible to get, your parents and my parents to tune in to CNN and Fox and MSNBC every day, all day. It's just disgusting. Right. And that's where I'm super angry and feel like there's a conspiracy theory, because they keep moving the goalposts on what it is they're willing to report.
Right. Which, by the way, is lack of leadership, because people in power and government have been doing the exact same shit.
Yep.
And lack of leadership, crying wolf, being hypocritical, leads to people that are like, you know what, fuck what these people are saying, I'm going and I'm doing whatever, right? Like, thus, like the complaint that your friend has, right? Like, people were super respectful at the very beginning, right? They were doing everything that they could because we didn't know how serious it was. For all we knew, it was as deadly as Ebola, right? So I think that people came together when it first happened, and were trying to be respectful and doing as much as they could. to prevent it. And if you brought up any questions, right, at all, it was like you were a horrible person. Like you were not allowed to ask any questions whatsoever. And I was asking questions while, staying at home more than what I was comfortable with, right? But we were still asking questions, and it was just like you were not allowed to ask any questions whatsoever. And now it just leads to people that don't want to listen to the government anymore because they've moved the goalpost. They've cried wolf. They've blown things out of proportion. There's been horrible management and lack of leadership. Like when it first went down, I was listening to the briefs every day. Like, remember when Anthony Fauci, and he's a doctor and he knows a shit ton more than 99.999% of people. But there was a period where Fauci was like, hey, no, don't, like, you actually shouldn't wear a mask. Right? Like, I don't know if do you remember that? Like at the very beginning, Fauci was saying like, don't wear a mask. So I was like not wearing a mask because Fauci was,
I remember that too.
Yeah. Fauci was saying, don't wear a mask. And I know he didn't have all the data or whatever, but that was the beginning of it for me where it was like, okay, like if this is supposed to be the expert and they're changing like 180 degrees like this quickly, there's something else that's up. And I really feel like the goalpost has moved so that they can continue to exaggerate things so that, get out the vote and polarize the country. Because Trump was going to win. If Trump would have won
if it wasn't for
COVID
for sure.
and the coverage and all of that. So.
For sure. So here's the thing that I forgive Fauci and I also don't forgive him. When he went back and forth, I think there was about a 30-day period where they went from wear a mask, don't wear a mask to wear a mask. And you'll be very familiar with this because of your military service. I felt very much that was like the stereotypical military move of like, tell them what we need to tell them until the government and the hospitals the rich people can stack PPE just in case we really do run out. Because I think there was a legitimate concern, like, could U.S. manufacturing catch up? Was China just going to shut us off and be like, fuck you, no more shipping containers from China because we're dealing with our own shit? I almost think, and maybe this will come out in some documentary 20 years from now, I almost think like this is the CDC, right? I think of that scene from Armageddon where Bruce Willis is like, wait a minute, you want us to fly to this asteroid and blow it up from the inside. Aren't you NASA? Don't you have smart people just sitting around thinking shit up? Like there's a great scene where Bruce Willis says that. And I thought the same thing when this all started. I'm like, you guys are the CDC. Like, don't you guys have smart people just sitting around thinking shit up? Don't you have a checklist of like, oh, respiratory infection from China. Here's what we do. Everybody wears a mask. Everybody does this. I think, and this is, again, going down a conspiracy theory tunnel, I think there was a concerted effort from the government to be like, oh, shit, if this is as real as we think it might be, we need the military, the government, the hospitals to have all the PPE. Don't let Cole and Scott go out and rush the 3M, website or Amazon and buy all the masks and the N95 masks and the breathing masks and the ventilators. Don't let them do that because we need that for the government supplies. So I kind of think that they changed their guidance, not because that's what they really thought was best, but because they were doing kind of a rationing system with supplies. I could be totally wrong.
I think that is very likely, very, very, very likely. But
then don't be pissed off when the American people don't trust you.
Exactly. And like, I'm smart enough to think that that's a possibility. So I'm going to go out and get mine. Like, why is the government more important than I am? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's my life. Like, I have every right to do what I need to do in order to protect it. So I'm not going to listen to the government. Like, I think that was the very beginning of people starting to distrust. It was the beginning for me of me starting to question, like, oh, maybe it's not just about science, which is what it's always, masked by, like, oh, this is the science and we're just following the science or whatever it may be. Well, the science changed like really quickly. There was a joke, and I'm going to butcher it, but it was something like, because we're in December now, and this all started in March, and the joke was like only 3 more months until, 2 weeks to flatten the curve of 2020 or whatever it was. Like, we've now gone almost a year of 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Yeah. And, I know it's, oh, that's a good laugh.
Solid.
I know it's I know it's politically inconvenient. I know a lot of people would have rebelled against this. And this is one point where I will highly criticize Trump, even though I think the media is out to get him, is that I think if Trump would have been a more presidential president, if he would have been more of a statesman, I think he could have, in a politically correct way, shut down the borders. He did shut down the border to China earlier when when all the Democrats said he was just being racist. I think he could have shut down the borders in a politically correct way. And then I think, I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, but what if in March or April or May, when we first started talking about the lockdowns, if we had a more presidential president who could say, look, there's going to be massive, massive sacrifice, but this is what we're going to do. There's going to be a run on the grocery stores. There's going to be a run on Costco. There's going to be a run on Amazon Prime delivery. And on April 15th, we are truly like martial law. We are locking down for 15 days. Yeah. You don't leave your fucking house unless you have COVID. Then your whole family transports to the hospital in one car. And no Costco, no this, no anything. Nothing is open. Live off your stocks. Yeah. Pray that you're a Mormon and that you've got 6 months worth of food in the garage. I would have had a lot more respect for that. But just like the bailouts in 2009, once the government starts picking winners and losers, I'm all out. Right. Like I'm all out on any of their guidance or any of their edicts or any of their authority. They lose the moral high ground when the government comes in and says, well, Costco can be open, but Phil's Diner can't. And strip clubs can be open, but churches can't. Right. And you can have family gatherings of 10, but not 11. Like once the government starts picking winners and losers, fuck the government. Right. So for me, if you really want to follow the science, like let's say, for example, we could get everybody to freeze in place for 2 weeks and there is no more disease transmission. I would be all up for the U.S. calling martial law and being like, hey, we're putting it in stone. We're violating the Constitution for 14 days. Mm-hmm. Everybody stay at home. I think in March or April or May, you could have pulled that off.
I would have been down with that.
Totally down with it.
Like, I would have hated it, but I would have been down with that.
Yeah, every libertarian hair on my body would have been raised up high. But I would have been like, all right, cool. They're not picking winners and losers. They're having a lockdown for the good of the country. Everybody is suffering exactly the same. Let's all do it. 14 days, knock it out. We'll go back to normal. And then if 700,000 people or 7 million people still die, we tried our best. Sorry.
Right.
But instead, fuck, man, once they start picking winners and losers.
Lose all credibility.
And
piss people off and they say, fuck you. You've shut down like my restaurant. I'm going out and spending time with my family.
Right.
And then it all goes to shit.
Right. And then, in California, we saw this a lot of places. Even if you're 100% on board, and I think most people are, with the ideal of Black Lives Matter, small b, small l, small m, not the political organization Black Lives Matters. Yeah. Once the governments of the country said, well, if you're protesting for a good reason, then you can be gathering by the tens of thousands or the hundreds of thousands without a mask on, and we're not going to shut it down, and we're not going to send the police in, which is absolutely fine. I'm okay with that. But then you also lose the moral high ground to tell people in the future, like, okay, well, now you have to go home and you can't be outdoors and you can't eat at outdoor restaurants. I mean, it's just so funny. And further to that, they proved, thanks to the protests, which then some of them turned into riots, but let's just talk about the peaceful protests. They proved from the protests that because they were outdoors in the sun, that was not a super spreader situation. Like there was not hundreds of thousands of people coming down with, deathly ill COVID symptoms from the protests, which is a great thing. I wanted that to happen. But now we have the proof that people can gather outside and eat in the sun and eat at outdoor restaurants because of the exception the government already made. So now that the government, especially here in California, is not making an exception to eat outdoors, it's like, no, fuck you, Newsom. You've lost all moral high ground when you said, well, these 100,000 people can be outdoors together because they have a cause, which is great. These 100,000 people that just want to eat and feed their family and run their restaurant, no, you guys can't be outdoors. Like it doesn't make a lick of sense.
Yep, agree.
It kills me.
Did you see a restaurant owner posted on Instagram today, the video? She had to shut her restaurant down, so the movie industry was able to come into her parking lot.
Yeah.
And they set up like a
outdoor eatery.
What's it called?
Like a set?
They set up, like their eating area, which looks exactly like her patio area.
I saw
and
that.
That's allowed to be open, but she's not. She's pretty pissed about that. The media people are like, well, we get tested 1 to 3 times a week.
Right. Yeah. Back to the elitism. Like, we're Hollywood, we're different. The rules don't apply. Mom, and I saw, it's funny you say that because I was literally just thinking about the exact same thing. Like, yes, 100%. It's we're Hollywood, we're elite, we're better. you're dirty. We don't want your dirty blue collar, average American
burger stand being opened,
beer drinking, whatever dude that got off of work and wants to chill out and relax a little bit. We don't want him going over to your restaurant, but us over here.
Yeah, we have catered service.
Yes.
And catered service
and
doesn't
we're
have COVID.
artists. And, so the rules do not apply.
I like that. We're artists.
Yeah.
So let's close out this COVID topic with one more thing, and it's the idea that I've been thinking of. We're approaching a vaccine. People are starting to get vaccinated now. But when the post-mortem is done on this, and hopefully it'll be a non-partisan post-mortem a couple of years from now, will we find out that the cure was worse than the disease? And a story from the LA Times that just came out a couple of days ago, California may have spent or sent $1 billion in jobless benefits to people outside of the state. So, they're estimating somewhere around $1 billion, which if that's what they know right now, maybe it ends up becoming $2 billion because the government always underestimates their mistakes. So let's say it becomes $2 billion of unemployment benefits that went to people living outside of California in the prison system who's not eligible, straight up fraud, sent to dead people because their kids, registered their dead grandmother who died 10 years ago for unemployment benefits.
Did you say people in prison? Because you heard about that one too.
Yeah, I heard about the ones in prison where they were claiming unemployment. And also, there was like some YouTube videos that went viral on like how to cheat the California unemployment system. So let's say, a state that's already running a huge budget deficit, which is weird because we were in a surplus, 10 years ago under Governor Brown. 5 years ago, we were in a surplus. But let's say a state that's in a massive, massive, massive deficit, and now we're going to go into more of a massive deficit because we're not collecting any business tax, sales tax, just things are in the shitter this year. If we gave out $1 billion or $2 billion of fake jobless claims, the inauthentic question is like, oh, well, how much is one life worth, or how much is grandma worth? Well, no offense, she's not worth $1 billion. Damn. Sorry. I mean, it's just the truth. I wish the congressional budget.
My grandma is. If my grandma ever watches this, you're totally worth $1 billion.
Okay. Well, all of my grandmothers are dead, so I guess bringing them back, not possible. But, I wish the Congressional Budget Office would come out because they're fairly nonpartisan. I think they do good work. If the Congressional Budget Office came out and said, hey, a human life is worth $672,000 this year, and then we could adjust for inflation. I've always thought, like, what a great number, right? Because then we wouldn't have to have all these weird court cases over, like, damages for death and wrongful death suits. It's like you could, it would be unfair, but you could estimate what the GDP value of one U.S. citizen is. And I'm not saying that that's how we should make all decisions. I'm not saying that's how we should make all decisions, but it would be an interesting number. Anyway, my point is if we find out that the fiscal devastation and the suicides and the alcoholism and the drug abuse and the children that are being left behind, losing a year or 2 years of education, if we find out that all of that was not worth the 20,000 lives that maybe possibly were saved, at what point do we look at it and be like, hey, man, the leaders of the country have to have a genuine conversation about is the cure worse than the disease?
Yep.
So I don't know how to do that because I don't want to tell people, hey, your grandmother should die.
Yep.
But people die.
Right.
Like you said, 1% of the U.S. population dies every year. We live in a very complex, dangerous, dirty, technologically advanced society where there's 100 million different ways to get cancer. Like, people die. And I don't mean to sound unsympathetic or heartless, but the libertarian in me is just like, yeah, there is a dollar value on human lives. Like, we can quantify that at some level.
So I disagree with you on the fact that you can quantify human life. I'm not prepared to do that. I think that that's really dark, and I don't think you could do that. Or if you could, I don't want to hear about it. But I am with you on was the cure more dangerous than the disease? Like that, I personally already think I can say yes.
Yeah.
As far as like quantifying what a human life is worth, no. No, I wouldn't do that. But I do think that it's fair to say at this point that the cure is more dangerous than the disease, with everything that you just talked about, with the apathy that's going to be created from people not working and getting a check. Like, there were a good number of people that I talk to. I know of more illegitimate claims of PPP funds, of people just kind of bragging that they got theirs, that didn't really need it, and people taking their extra 600 of unemployment and putting that towards like tedious bullshit and buying stuff on Amazon while simultaneously talking shit about Jeff Bezos. I know more cases of that than I do like people that were like, no, I can't make ends meet. I'm going to be homeless if I don't get this money.
Right. No, absolutely. And I know some people that, you know, they just looked at the system. They're like, one from column A, one from column B. I fit with column C and I meet all the criteria. So to your point, like, why wouldn't I get mine? Like everybody else is going to. I pay a monster amount of taxes to live in the state of California. You know, when you start seeing things like Tom Brady's company, TB12, his fitness company, getting X millions of dollars in PPP loans, and the Los Angeles Lakers taking out X millions of dollars. You got to remember, the Los Angeles Laker entity is really kind of just the Lakers. In the Staples Center, they lease out all the food services. So it's not like those PPP loans that the Lakers took were to feed or keep employed the $12 an hour, you know, beer drink pourers, because all of that is leased out to another third company. It's like the Lakers, you know, the LeBron Jameses of the world, the Tom Brady's of the world are taking PPP loans. And I'm like, what the fuck? You know, and then at some level, I'm like, well, I also can't begrudge them, because unless they committed actual fraud, you know, if they fit within the guidelines of what the PPP loan was for.
And they got theirs.
And they pay hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes if you're the Lakers or Tom Brady and Gisele Bündchen. Gisele. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just know Gisele.
I have no idea who that is.
Gisele is Tom Brady's wife, which is funny because Tom Brady for a long time was one of the highest paid people in the NFL, and his income was pocket change compared to what his wife, supermodel and investor Gisele made. She's like, you should look this up, Chris. I think Gisele's net worth over Tom Brady, I think she's like 5 or 10x Tom Brady's net worth, because when she was a model, she invested really smartly in like some makeup companies and like a plastic company that makes all the cheap sandals that you buy at resorts around the world. Like, Gisele's got generational money, and Tom Brady's definitely got FU money, but it's 400 million Gisele's worth. Yeah. And I bet Tom Brady's worth like 100 million. Like, it's so funny that the prenup in that family came from the wife. And it was like, Tom, I don't want your money.
Tom Brady's at 180.
Oh, 180. Okay. I thought it was like 5X. So he's catching up. He got a good contract here in the last couple of years. But yeah, I agree with you. And then, you know, on the more drastic side of the cure is worse than disease. I know anecdotally, you have a friend of a friend, you know, friends of friends and friends of friends of friends of friends. I know of 3 people that have died of COVID in California. Yeah, that was sad. Bad sound effect timing. So
that's why we're practicing.
I know of 3 people who are friends of friends, you know, so like 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon removed that died of COVID. I know 3 people personally who were important in my personal life who have committed suicide. Since this whole thing went down. And it's brutal, you know? And you hear about things like every liquor store and weed store is open, but people that are in AA can't get together and commune and stay sober. And it's brutal. I think the cure is worse than the disease at this point. So we're in agreement there.
Yeah, I don't think I've got anything to add to that.
Yeah. So let's talk about our new Los Angeles district attorney.
Don't know much about it.
So this is interesting. And Chris, you're going to have to pull up his recent edict that he just sent out. Just look up, you know, new district attorney, Los Angeles County. So, you know, this is what drives me nuts, right? Is everybody in the world has a super, super strong opinion on Trump versus Biden or Nancy Pelosi or Governor Newsom. And the things that really affect us, the stuff that affect us here being Los Angelinos, is like, who's your district attorney? Who's your city council person? Who's your mayor? So, you know, having done a stellar job up in San Francisco, this guy, George Gascon, goes from being, I think, district attorney in San Francisco to district attorney in Los Angeles. I don't know how that worked. I guess he finally fucked up stuff so bad in San Francisco, maybe got voted out. Maybe you can look that up too, Chris. So he gets elected here as district attorney in Los Angeles. And the very first thing that he does is he sends out, I don't know if it's called an edict or a memorandum or whatever he sends out. He sends out this this memo effectively. It's 2 pages. And I talked to a friend of mine who's on the LAPD, and what was explained to me is obviously the police arrest criminals and they're responsible for kind of enforcing the law at the street level. But if they get a memo from the district attorney that says, hey, we're no longer prosecuting any credit card fraud under $5,000 because we just don't have the manpower, or we just don't have the will anymore to go after these criminals. So, if it's a fraudulent credit card used under 5,000 or 10,000, just write it off, like don't even investigate it. So the LAPD really takes their cues from the district attorney of like, hey, what type of crimes are we taking seriously and what type of crimes are we not taking seriously? So just recently, this is in his first couple days of office, District Attorney George Gascon sends out a memorandum that says we're going to do a couple things. We're going to no longer prosecute juveniles for anything. We're going to no longer prosecute for trespassing. We're going to no longer prosecute for prostitution. We're going to no longer prosecute for resisting arrest. Ooh. We're going to no longer prosecute for driving without a license. And, we're basically going to allow these victims, I mean, this is like straight out of Newspeak 1984, these victims, AKA the criminals, right, who are a victim of the system, we're just not going to wrap them up into the legal system for doing small things like prostitution, petty crimes, trespassing. We're going to focus on the violent criminals. Well, I'm not a law and order expert, but I have a lot of friends that are police officers. And, again, coming from more of that kind of military conservative background and just growing up in Los Angelino, I don't believe people just wake up one day in their mid-20s with a good job and say, you know what I'm going to be? I'm going to be a violent criminal today. I'm going to start raping and murdering and violently attacking and committing hate crimes. No, these are the people that start as minors doing petty crime, and then they upgrade to trespassing, and then they don't worry about getting a license, so then they drive without a license, and then one time they're almost arrested and they fight back against the cop and they evade arrest, and then eventually these crimes compound, and yes, maybe they get stuck in the system, but like career criminals, the violent criminals, they started out as little criminals. Yeah. And he's basically just told the police, we're no longer prosecuting these crimes. So, we're sitting here with an open garage door because we're smoking cigars. If somebody walks into my house and trespass and just decides to stand next to us and take a shit on my carpet, the police aren't going to prosecute for that anymore. No. Petty crimes, trespassing. I guess if a prostitute wanted to walk in here, they can't arrest her. They can't arrest us. Like, we didn't order one, but I'm just like, what? This is the craziest shit I've ever read, and we don't want to victimize mostly law-abiding citizens, is what he said.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm living in the Twilight Zone.
Me too. I think most of those are pretty scary to hear. I don't know, but like the children thing, maybe I could get behind that. I don't know. I think that children should be taken care of and disciplined by their parents, but I know everybody doesn't have parents that are going to discipline them. Thought that I have on that one is going to, and this will sound really weird for me to draw this comparison, but in Nigeria, and if you've gone to like any third world country, or even countries that aren't like the U.S. or Canada or whatever, right? Just poor
So
countries.
Wait, let's give some people some background, because for you to randomly just say, so if you go to Nigeria, you might want to share with people that you've been to a mission trip 3 times in Nigeria, really deep into the shit, right?
Yeah, but that's not particularly important. But yes, I've been to Nigeria a couple of times. But if you go there, or any third world country, there is a lack of like basic infrastructure and enforcement of small things like driving through a red light. Like traffic in Nigeria is insane. Like if you think traffic in Mexico is bad, like doesn't hold anything to what it's like in Nigeria. And I can't remember who it was that I was talking to. Somebody who's like had extensive time there and extensive time in, here in the U.S. Maybe it was the missionary that was there. I don't remember. But they talk about how countries like that lack enforcement of basic laws, you start to see, and maybe this is a chicken and the egg argument, I really don't know, but countries that do not enforce, simple things like trespassing or prostitution or, the things that you were talking about, the fabric of their society slowly starts to evaporate over time. And I think even when I was talking to this person, and I'm just riffing and talking out of my ass right now, but I think they've talked about other big historical countries, or before there were countries, there were empires. The fabric of those empires or institutions started to disintegrate when they stopped enforcing like the simple stuff, the basic stuff. Or even in cities that used to be good and then became bad, it starts when people start sacrificing. Oh, well, it's just going through a red light, right? Because then I see you go through a red light and I'm like, well, why the fuck does Scott get to go through a red light? I'm going to do the same thing. Like, why is Scott more important than I am? Or if somebody's going to trespass on my property and do what they want, I'm going to trespass on my neighbor's property. Like, why are they any different? And then the fabric of society starts to disintegrate. So I'd heard about that like a week or so ago, or maybe it was just a day or two ago. I really don't remember, but I had heard about this, and it made me nervous, because I thought of exactly what I just said to you, is when you stop enforcing the basic stuff, other things start to follow.
Well, this is the whole broken window sociology thought process, right? And I think maybe you could see who we were supposed to credit that to, Chris. The broken window theory, I think, came up in the 80s, and it was mentioned by a sociologist or a professor, where it's like, down here, I'll use down the street from me, there's a strip mall that's, it's very dated, it's very old looking, but it's clean, and the jiu-jitsu instructor who I don't work out with there, of course, because you can't work out right now, but the jiu-jitsu instructor who I don't work out there with, he rents space in there, and it's like it's this broken window thesis where it's like, well, if a couple of the stores have a broken window and nobody fixes it, well, then maybe that encourages some misdemeanors to hang out there and loiter and do some stuff that's not on the up and up with the law. And then if they can loiter there, well, then, like, I don't know, does my instructor really want to have kids coming into his location for, karate and youth skills and stuff? So then maybe he moves out, and then you've got another vacant unit, and then you've got more broken windows, and then you've got more crime. And then the petty crime escalates to larger crime. And there's a reason the slippery slope actually is a legitimate concern, because then all of a sudden, well, is somebody just running prostitution out of the van, and then that, prostitution comes along with drugs and human trafficking. And I know you worked for a nonprofit that tried to stop human trafficking through prostitution. So this idea that prostitution is just a small crime that we're not going to convict for, okay, maybe you're sympathetic to the prostitute, but it's a crime that should be investigated, because it usually comes with something more violent, drug trafficking or human trafficking or something like that. So to just give up on, and I'm reading the extended list of crimes here. I mentioned a few of them, but another one is disturbing the peace.
Right.
Another one is making criminal threats.
Yeah.
Another one is, the big one to me is resisting arrest, right? Yeah. So it's like, if you've already committed a crime or a presumed crime where a police officer thinks they need to intervene, and then you can resist arrest, and the cop's like, well, if they resist arrest, they're not going to be prosecuted. Fuck it, just let them go. Well, guess what? Then that person goes and is emboldened to commit yet another crime. Yeah. And for people that know anybody that lived in New York in the 60s, 70s, 80s, before Giuliani started to lose it a little bit over the last couple of years, he was world renowned for turning New York around, because he really believed in this broken window thesis, where it's like, no, you can't allow somebody to loiter on the corner in Central Square and sell pot. Yeah, it's just pot, but no, that leads to another criminal element, that leads to another criminal element, and all of a sudden tourists won't come to New York. And New York in the 70s and 80s was a shit show until Giuliani took over. Could you see when Giuliani was mayor, Chris? I think he became mayor in 86 or 88 is when they really turned that around. And then, not surprisingly, that's when property values started to skyrocket. That's when there was a resurgence of that being the financial capital of the world. I don't remember this because I was young, but I remember reading about that. A lot of the financial markets had started to move to Chicago. There was word of of Wall Street relocating somewhere else, because New York was such a crime den and such a shit show. And so then they started with this broken window policing theory. Now, they might have gone too far with some of their stop and frisk policies, and they might have been racially profiling, which is not okay. But the thought of, like, upholding the law for simple crime, it stops the bigger stuff, just like you're saying. And I don't think anybody with common sense would disagree with this.
Right.
I don't. 89 is when he became mayor? Yeah. So
good job.
Yeah, there you go. Which is weird, because I was 9 years old, so I don't know why I know this. But yeah, I think even, we were mentioning earlier, if you asked that person who posted on Facebook, hey, have you really gone and seen Family and Friends? I think if you asked anybody, even the most die-hard, bleeding heart progressive, like, hey, do you really want people trespassing on your property and prostitutes hanging out on the corner of your block without the police coming and doing something? I'm virtually certain every single one of them would say no.
Correct. You've really got the B- Joe Rogan setup, because even like your dog, Joe Rogan's got this beautiful golden retriever with beautiful hair.
And I've got Jack who sheds
you've got
like a cheap carpet.
Jack who sheds and has one eye.
Yeah.
And I could see this plug behind Cole on the camera, and it's just killing me.
Oh, okay.
But I'm just crop it out.
All right, cool.
So what do we do?
Yeah, what do we do?
It'll probably sound like a really simple and basic answer, but this is what I think. I think it comes down to individual responsibility and good parents raising their children.
It's a good sound effect.
Yeah. I mean, it really does sound like the cliche, easy answer. But what else is going to do it? If we're going to say, oh, it's going to be some kind of government policy, I think we would be hypocritical. And we've already seen that that doesn't work, right? So I really do think that it comes from a change of culture. Man, I don't remember who it was, but somebody wrote an article about culture or politics being downstream from culture, right? And so I think a lot of this starts with a change of culture or a return to culture of like true personal responsibility. Like I saved for a rainy day during COVID, and yeah, our industry has gone well, but I'm saving for that rainy day. Like I don't spend every last dollar that I have because I'm not relying upon the government to, back me up when the mortgage industry inevitably comes to, a standstill or slows down or whatever it may be. I really do think that, and you can hit the little sound effect again if you'd like, but I really do think that it comes down to personal responsibility, to think that other people are going to take care of you, other people are going to fix your problems. It just doesn't happen. The only person who's ever taken care of me is my family and myself, and like good friends, right? Like people from church or close friends, like somebody like you. Outside of that, like who is going to fix it? Like we've got to work together and band together and, instill traditional values without the bad parts that we had.
Yeah. I also want to believe you. And I also want to think that raising my kids with a belief around personal responsibility and I would say a more traditional sense of either parenting or personal responsibility, but I don't even know that it's traditional. I think it's timeless. Maybe timeless, because I feel when people say traditional or conservative, immediately you get branded like, oh, so you don't support gay marriage? No, I don't give a fuck who marries who. I really don't. So maybe it's more timeless is the word that I want to use, where it's like, if we can go back to more traditional ideas, like I know something that's catching a lot of traction right now, thanks to Ryan Holiday, an author who I think you like as well. A lot of this idea about the Stoics, like a return to these principles from Aristotle and Marcus Aurelius that like they still ring true today, right? So more of these timeless maxims, I want to believe that can work, but when both parties, whether it's the Democrats saying like, oh, well, let's just forgive all student loans, let's just give free money to people and hope they vote for us, or whether it's the Republicans cutting taxes or whatever their pet project of the week is, I'm concerned that both parties have set up this dynamic where the only lever they have left to pull to trick or entice people to come vote for them is to give out free shit.
Right.
I feel like we've hit a critical mass where at least 51% of America doesn't want to return to personal responsibility. Because, if you're one of the 20% of people that can get a tax break, plus you're one of the 10% of people that can get your student loans forgiven, and then you're part of the 30% of people that are on public assistance, which all those people are probably in mostly different demographics. So now all of a sudden you're just talking about 50, 60, 70, 80% of the U.S. population. All they can think about is, how can a political party get me for more free shit or pay less taxes? It's like, we've reached the tipping point, right? Where like 50% of people just don't believe in that personal responsibility. And I agree with you. Like, you know, we've been super blessed for the mortgage business to do amazing this year. And there was a time back in 2009 where frankly, I should have gone on unemployment and I should have declared bankruptcy and I should have walked away from everything. And I didn't. My pride just got in the way. And you know, big successful moment here in the last couple of months where I finally paid off the million dollars of debt that I was in from 2009. And I don't begrudge anybody that had to make life decisions and walk away from debt or, you know, send properties into foreclosure or declare bankruptcy or whatever. But I think this idea that I think the idea of personal responsibility is almost blasé or passé in American culture, and it's really worrying me that ship has sailed. And I'm not one of these crazies that thinks there has to be a revolution or blood in the streets or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. Do you think personal responsibility is dead?
No. I think it's rare, but I don't think that it's dead. We see certain areas where people are, I think, maturing and growing up and doing that. You know, when we went and we saw Jordan Peterson together, right, there's like a group of people that, you know, subscribe to the same kind of things that what he is teaching and what he talks about. And a big part of that is the personal responsibility and, you know, starting by making their bed or whatever. Like, these are all, unfortunately, things that are like laughed about, like the idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and making your bed. Like, people take that as a joke, but that's one of the first things that you get taught when you're in the military. Like, it's a very simple thing. But when I make my bed in the morning each day, like, I feel good. And yeah, it's something that's timeless, right? Yeah, man, I get frustrated sometimes. And I sometimes feel hopeless, but then I come across people that are trying to do the right thing. You know, I've had family that's gone through difficult times and I've seen them turn around. So, you know, people go through difficult times and difficult seasons in their life, but I think everybody's got a huge opportunity to grow and succeed. You know, author of Harry Potter, right? Like, she was homeless or living out of her car, doing something up until she wrote Harry Potter, and she was like older before she succeeded. And you know, now we're getting into all the cliche stuff, which is too bad because there's truth to it, right? Like, Abraham Lincoln, like, ran for office over and over and over again. He lost, and then, you know, he became the president. Michael Jordan, like that commercial that he has where he talks about taking all the shots, and he's like, he fails over and over and over again, but that's the reason why he succeeds. I think it's a part of like the technology and everything being at your fingertips is that we, you know, all of these super important and valuable pieces of information and wisdom that we have that is timeless for some reason, because it's so easy and accessible, like it becomes a joke.
Well, that wasn't really the encouraging words I was looking for, that everything that you and I believe in is becoming a joke, but I get what you're saying.
Right. Right. I mean, it has become a joke to a lot of people, but others, like, there's no way for us to quantify this. How many people think it's a joke and how many people believe in it? Like, I don't know, but I know that I come across those people, and that's what gives me hope, is that there's people that you do see, like, turn a corner and succeed. Like, we have a coworker who we worked with at New American Funding, right? And he was having a difficult time. He's doing great now, right? Like, people are able to work hard and pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Like, that's not a joke. They're able to overcome difficult seasons in their life and succeed and achieve their goals in one way or another. Like, that makes me hopeful. Maybe it has something to do with the technology is something that we want to watch and see, or the things that are like the most dramatic and extreme. Like, why is the news so depressing? Like, the news is created to get views, and for one reason or another, like, they've realized that the depressing stuff gets more views than the good story. So maybe the solution is limiting the access to the screen. I don't know.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I'm hopeful that humans in America, because I think we've been a pretty empathetic society, pretty sympathetic society pretty like charitable society. Like we've done plenty of shit wrong, but if you look at the amount of charity that we give out on a personal level, from religious institutions, from our government, I'm hopeful that we can get back to being sympathetic and empathetic without pity driving decisions. Because I think when you show sympathy and you show empathy and you kind of help out your fellow man, you know, my wife and I this year were blessed enough to do well enough where we were able to donate to some families this holiday season and really change some people's lives for an amount of money that thankfully for us have become kind of trivial. It was because we wanted to do it. It's because we felt it was the right thing to do. And again, I think there was sympathy and empathy, but where I think maybe we've gone too far is that when people feel pity for one reason or another, they start to vote for solutions that show pity. And I don't like that, because am I sympathetic and empathetic to a bunch of 18-year-olds that were tricked into signing on the line, which is dotted for $200,000 of student loans, and then they get out of college and find out that what they can get is a $75,000 a year job? Yes, I'm very sympathetic to those people. I'm very empathetic with those people. I think it's shitty. I think schools need to be reformed so that 18-year-olds whose brains aren't even fully formed can make better decisions and they can get a degree without going so far into debt. But I don't feel pity to where I think that the government should step in and pay those loans off. I don't think that's your responsibility as a taxpayer, or Chris's or my responsibility as a taxpayer, to pay off those debts for a personal decision that they make. So I don't know how we get back to a empathetic society without just feeling like, well, I'm feeling pity on these people, so the government will fix it. Let me just vote for more government plans and more government spending and more government subsidies and more bailouts, because it just doesn't feel like that's sustainable.
And I think that makes those people that are the recipients feel disempowered. Like, I don't know about you, but I think if I had $200,000 of student loan debt and that got forgiven, like, I think probably, actually, I know in that moment, like, I would be super excited and happy. But I also think, like, I would look myself in the mirror and be like, well, like, I signed up for that and I didn't, fulfill the obligation that I signed and said that I was going to do. Like, that person now becomes disempowered in some weird ways. Like, it goes back to the, typical Republican, conservative, liberal, Democrat. Like, I think that a lot of those policies that say, oh, you're a victim, it's in some ways, it's almost the most oppressive and the most racist, if it happens to be an issue of race, whatever it may be. Like, you're almost looking at somebody else and saying, hey, I am where I am, but you're incapable of achieving these things. So you need, this resolution. You need this extra money. You need this forgiveness of debt. Whereas somebody who works hard and does the work and makes it happen, like, they have a sense of pride. Like, the most difficult things. And again, I hate to keep going into these cliches, but the most difficult things that we go through are the things that make us who we are. And if you take away those difficult things, climbing out of debt, like getting super, super, super skinny and eating, Dave Ramsey says beans and rice and beans, like, so you can pay off your debt on your own without going into bankruptcy or whatever it may be, like, doing what you have to do to be responsible for yourself and make your own decisions versus relying upon somebody else. I feel like you get a sense of pride by accomplishing those things on your own versus looking to somebody else. And the people that say that they have to help you are the ones that think less of you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Where do you think there can be a return, though, to that, individual help and sympathy? Because obviously church attendance in America is way down, especially off of its height. It seems like yearly there's a major attack on any institution that used to be there for community support, whether it's a church or the Boy Scouts of America or the VFW or whoever they want to take away, tax exempt status from or sue out of existence. Like, I'm just worried, like, do those institutions even exist to lend that helping hand? Because I do know there's a lot of Americans who need a helping hand. They're not even the position to pull themselves up by the bootstraps because they don't have the tools or they don't have the community or they don't have, you mentioned there's always been friends or family or religious groups to help you out in those time of need.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that don't have the family or the religious group or the friends or whatnot. So I want there to be a social safety net for the people that are just like, maybe they stumble across this podcast and they're like, yeah, I want to take more personal responsibility, but like they might not even have the tools to know what that means. And I'm not pitying them, and I'm not thinking less of them. I'm just thinking like, well, the circumstances in which they grew up, they don't even have those tools. So I don't know where does it come from? I don't know if it comes from charitable organizations or, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife donating all of her money to charities that end up filling this gap, or whether religion makes a resurgence, or CrossFit gyms become the new community that uplifts the downtrodden. Like I just don't. I'm trying to visualize where it comes from in the future. And I can't put my finger on that thing, because if I could put my finger on that thing, that's where all of my donation money would go from.
Yeah.
Or go to, sorry. That's where all my donatable dollars would go to, is if I could put my finger on that thing of there's the West LA Boys Club of Southern California Masonic Eagle Scouts. I don't know. But what is that organization, or what is that infrastructure that helps those people?
I don't think there's one path. There's plenty of examples of people coming from all kinds of different areas of life, different parts of the country, different races, different religions. There's people in any walk of life that you could point to and you could say, hey, here's somebody who's been successful, and you model them. Like right now we model things that don't lead to success or are, dead ends. I think that we have to hold people that have succeeded and are, lived honorable lives. We hold them up in esteem, because I don't care what your background is. There's an example of somebody who had a similar upbringing, was surrounded by similar people. And I recognize that I have plenty of opportunities that other people didn't. But I know plenty of people that had the same opportunities that I did that, aren't doing great. And I know other people that came from much, much, much worse places than I did that are significantly more successful than what I am. So I think it just comes from like holding people that are honorable and high esteem. And that's what I think is lacking. So if it was anything, I think it would be an organization that just says, hey, look at this person over here that came from a similar background that you did. They did it. Like, do what they did. Like, it's not difficult for me. It's, I graduated high school with a shitty GPA and couldn't get into any university. So I went to the junior college, and then I worked all the time. Like, I worked full time while going to school full time. And like, it wasn't anything special. It was like difficult, but not so difficult that I don't think anybody could do. Like, just do things to make yourself better. And that sounds simple, but look to somebody who came from a similar background as you. You didn't come from, your family's not rich.
No.
Like, what did you do? Like, if somebody came, grew up and, I know you were in Palmdale. Like, there's not a whole lot of people in Palmdale that are doing super great. Like, nobody grows up and says, hey, I want to move to Palmdale. Like, that's where I want to end up. Like, that's not a super great place. So, like, what did you do? If somebody grew up in Palmdale, what would you tell them to do? You know what I mean? So,
totally. You know who I think's doing this at a really admirable level is you and I are both obviously fans of Joe Rogan. Half the reason this podcast is starting is because I think he's a pretty influential individual in America. And if I could reach 1/1,000,000th of the people that he has, that would be awesome. What is, you want me to move the mic because I'm lighting the cigar?
it sounds cool.
It sounds cool.
Like
it's a blowtorch. It adds. Yeah. People know now that I'm going in for the second cigar. Joe Rogan's had Kevin Hart on a bunch of times, and Kevin Hart has said, in the black community, you can't send in. He's got a partnership with J.P. Morgan and Chase, where they wanted him to do some community outreach and some fiscal. Basically fiscal responsibility training and financial training. And he goes, yeah, the problem is, I think he said this in one of the podcasts. He's like, the first meeting I showed up to was me and a bunch of white dudes in suits. And he's like, you white dudes in suits cannot be the guys that go into the inner city and try to talk about fiscal responsibility. And he goes, you're going to be talking to kids who some of them are generations in where their parents and their grandparents have not had a checking account, much less a mortgage or a car loan or great credit. And he's like, you have to send people in that look like me, that came from those areas, that can say, hey, there is a way to become financially successful. And that doesn't mean you have to be a comedian or an athlete or somebody famous. You can work in any job, and you can show a little bit of fiscal responsibility through savings and a 401k and contributing to whatever your company plan is. I remember doing a loan for this guy. He was a middle-aged Hispanic gentleman, admitted to me that he may have come to this country illegally. And he got a job at Jack in the Box. It's the only place that he could get hired at 17 in the 80s. And he stayed at Jack in the Box for 20 years. And by the time I met him, he had been at Jack in the Box for 20 years. And, not a glamorous job by any stretch of the imagination, but he had worked from, flipping burgers to a store assistant manager, to a store shift manager, to a store manager, whatever the career progression is at Jack in the Box. And now for some franchisee owner, he basically managed 4 or 5 Jack in the Boxes. And when I did his first home loan about 10 years ago, he bought a modest house in Northeast LA for $450,000. That's now worth $1 million.
Yeah.
He had, I think, $500,000 or $750,000 in his Jack in the Box 401k, because luckily somebody from his neighborhood or in his family told him on day one, yeah, you should contribute to this thing in the 80s that just came out, this 401k, or maybe they came out in the 70s, I don't know. And he just contributed to it, right? He did all the right things. Somebody pulled him aside and gave him a little bit of financial literacy, where his credit was great. He had $500,000 or $750,000 in his Jack in the Box 401k. He was buying his first house because he had put 5% aside. His kid was getting into college, at Cal State LA, which was just a huge win. First kid in the family to go to college. And, in talking to the dude, I don't know that I would interview him for this podcast, right? He wasn't blowing the doors off with his intellect, but he was a hardworking motherfucker who just did the right thing and saw somebody in his community ahead of him succeed. And so he knew what success looks like. He did it. And now you know what Northeast LA looks like. If he bought a house in 2011 for $400,000, it's probably worth $1 million now. He's probably paid off his kid's college. He's doing great. And to your point, I think it doesn't matter where you come from. If you can find somebody who was successful, or success leaves clues, if you can find somebody who just did it a little bit better than you and then follow their example and put in the work. I remember seeing that. I was just so encouraged. And I really felt like, this feels good. I'm helping this guy obtain the American dream. Oh, there goes my dog. Crazy. I guess his flea collar is failing him. Here's a guy that's like literally living the American dream, and now his kid's going to do even better than he is. So that was pretty awesome.
Yeah. That's it. Go to Jack in the Box, get a job working minimum wage.
There you go.
Like, dude, I don't know the answers to how everybody turns it around, but I just look to other people. That's why I reached out to you, man. Right? Like 5 years ago when we first met, it's like, who's doing it really well? Who's doing it the best? It was you. So I reached out to you. That's all. I don't know if that's like a place of privilege or something that somebody told me at one point, hey, look at somebody who's doing something really well and ask them how they're doing it. Like, I feel like that is just common sense, but maybe it's not. I don't know.
I hope it is.
Yeah.
I hope it is.
I would think so.
And I hope there's a lot of people doing well that are taking time, especially in these days of COVID-19, when we've all got more time because we're stuck at home and we're not doing anything social. I hope there's a lot of people taking time to mentor people. Something that I put in the book that I wrote, shameless plug for the book, Lead Generate 61 Days to Double Your Pay. Somebody told me this a long time ago, and I put it in the book, that you should always be mentoring somebody. You should always have a friendly rival, that sibling rivalry who's helping you strive. And then you should always have somebody who's 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead of you mentoring you. And yeah, I guess somebody told me that early because I would always, even when I was broke in 2009 in the mortgage industry, I was still trying to mentor somebody, and somebody was mentoring me, and I was seeking those people out. And then I had a friendly, well, not so friendly sibling rivalry with another loan officer who we decided we were going to make it, and we weren't going to quit and go take some middle management job at IKEA because the mortgage industry sucked. And I'm very thankful that I stayed in and have enjoyed the last 10 years. But yeah.
You still own his URL?
I still own some people's URL. Yes. What did we miss, man? We're coming late December. What are you looking forward to for 2021? Like, What did we miss?
I miss going to concerts, doing the movies, like the really basic shit, man. The thing that's particularly exciting because I've traveled more this year than I have in previous years outside of, doing our annual Nigeria trip, which I didn't get to go to. But yeah, Lee and I went to Tulum. We went to Colorado last week. We got up to Utah. We're going to Utah again. Done some road trips up north. Like, I've traveled a lot. Like, I haven't really slowed down because I'm doing the things that I feel like I'm supposed to do to not spread the COVID around. And I think a return to normalcy would be cool, just healthy overall for people. I'm looking forward to others being able to enjoy life. Like, I have, some people that are taking it very, 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 very serious, and I don't get to go out and have drinks with them and, get food or whatever else it may be that we like to do together. But yeah, I think some semblance of normalcy is what I'm looking forward to, and more of the same. I feel like we're always trying to do something different, and I'm always trying to grow. But this year's been good. For myself, like, I've had a good year. So I think if I could continue to do what I did in 2020 and 2021, like, I'll be pretty stoked. Like, I don't know about you. It's been a great year, professionally. Gotten close with the people that, I'm friends with. Like, we've kind of been forced to figure out new ways that we can't go and see 311 this year, right? Like, going and having cigars in your spa or whatever else it may be. Like, I hope we can continue to do some of those things that we probably wouldn't have done had COVID not happened,
Yeah. Yeah, you and I are friends with a gentleman named John Vroman. He runs a group called the Front Row Dads. And I was talking to him the other day, and he said, mask, no mask, lockdown, no lockdown, Trump, Biden, wherever you're at on the political spectrum, one of the things that you can be doing in this time is focusing on, like, hey, what's a great place to win or grow no matter the circumstances, right? And he was talking about doubling down on family time. Mm-hmm. Whether we're in lockdown or whether, it's a Great Depression or it's the booming 20s,
right.
It doesn't really matter, right? Like, doubling down on family time is always going to be a good thing.
Right.
Having some more savings in the bank, again, doesn't matter if the economy is surging or crashing. Having some more money in the bank, that's always going to be a net positive.
Right.
Focusing on your health, even if it just means buying a set of dumbbells, which are kind of hard to come by right now. But buying a set of dumbbells and working out in your garage, like, healthier body, always going to be a great thing, whether or not you're trying to fight off COVID or whether you're just trying to look better at the beach because there is no COVID.
Right.
And so something that he said that really resonated with me, I was like, hey, what are some of the things I can be focusing on and some of the places that I can be trying to win in my life, regardless of what's going on with the presidency or social media or COVID or my business? There's certain truths, going back to, like, trying to get back to timeless truths. There's certain truths where it's like, if you're healthier, happier, you have a better homeless life, you can weather certain storms of being sick or being poor or being broke or having challenges in our personal life. And I think it's a little bit of a testament to our times and social media and the social dilemma and everybody hyper involved in politics that people are substituting those things that they could be focusing on to get better in their life for external stuff, whether it's going to be Biden or Trump. For the most part, who gives a shit? Like, right. I challenge anybody to show me one policy that Trump or Biden or Obama or Bush enacted that affected you on a very personal level. Probably not so much. Probably not as much as District Attorney Gascon, who's now going to let people shit in my front yard and not prosecute them for it.
Right.
So, I think focusing on a win. And in 2021, man, I'm looking forward to focusing on health again. Maybe not smoking cigars and drinking whiskey every night, but that's so much fun. So maybe we'll have to come up with a prop bet or something for health.
Yeah, I think the health would be good. I'd like to have more energy in 2021.
Yeah, never a bad thing.
Right. Yeah, I haven't been particularly healthy. That's probably one spot. I'm looking forward to going back to church. Like, not going to church has sucked. Like, I know for some people that doesn't matter. But, man, I miss going into the building and hearing a message from the pastor. They do it online now, but I think it would be nice to be able to get back in the building and go to church. I know a lot of people that are missing that.
Yeah. So are you and the girlfriend who's Jewish, are you guys going to switch like 1 week in the synagogue, one week in chapel? Like,
We haven't even had to deal with it, because it's not possible. So I guess we'll deal with that when it comes up, because as it is now, we can't.
I'm so looking forward to our kids having like a Christian uncle and a Jewish aunt, and just being able to be like, hey, I'm so ignorant on religion. Kids, go hang out with Uncle Cole and he'll figure it out. He'll teach you everything.
She was saying she was looking forward to listening to the podcast, and now I probably will not be sending it to her.
We'll definitely be sending it to her. That's awesome. Well, hey, man, I think that's how we end our first podcast on the edge.
Cool.
I don't think we said anything too edgy. We probably pissed off 90% of the audience at some point in the last 2 hours, but that's okay.
It didn't feel edgy at all, but I think that's our normal conversation. Not edgy to us.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
All right, man. Well, we'll see you back in a couple months when we interview you again, and then we'll have to dig in deep on the Nigeria trips, because we flirted with that, but that's probably a 2-hour podcast just talking about my Nigeria.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, bro. Love you, man.
Love you too.